Do you know, it may sound kinky, but I could fancy myself. Come up and see me sometime. Who is it?
Me, Sid.
Just a minute, I'm not decent. What am I saying?
How's it going? Hey, you're lovely.
Oh, shut up.
No, really, I mean it. Come here.
Get away from me, you dirty old man!
Well, anyway, that's enough of the comedy for tonight. And now for the reality, us. Of the four of us in the studio this evening, two are transsexuals, awaiting sexual conversion surgery, and the other two, including myself, are what are known as sex changers, woman born of man. We're first going to show you a short film telling you something about each one of us.
I remember the first day out that I actually wore a skirt, out on the street, in public, as trans. I've been building up to this day for a long time. The journey from closet to a more integrated transgender identity is hard and can be terrifying at times, ultimately making that first step out of the door particularly so. I'm Alex, I live just above Cardiff. I am a trans woman and I live full-time as a trans woman, but I'm also widening the bandwidth of how to be a woman. So I've always made and fixed stuff, you know, from an earliest age. Kind of in my early years, it also was very much tied into a masculine identity, you know, having dirty hands, that's like masculine. And so kind of now, as a trans woman, if I'm fixing the car and I've got my boiler suit on, that doesn't take away my femininity. I can actually be a trans woman fixing a car. Women are allowed to fix cars too. The prospect of the thought of surgery terrifies me. You know, the idea that I'd have, that to be accepted as a woman, I'd have to surrender my body to medical science to make it conform to, you know, it's sort of offensive really. I mean, you know, to be obliged, that is. You know, people can opt for surgery, but to feel compelled to or required to, for me, that, you know, that just doesn't feel right. And to be honest, no amount of hormones is going to make me look like Claudia Schiffer. So, you're curious about the beard, huh? Well, it was kind of an accident. Back in my 30s, I kind of grew it in a bid to like man up and get rid of the whole girl thing. But it sort of works because it creates a very explicit transgender. People can read that I've got a male history, but they can also see I present as female. So it kind of deconstructs gender, it queers gender.
You know, the first time you have somebody like a big guy come by and say, act like a man, you disgust me. And in a crowded tube platform where everybody's hearing this abuse and nobody's jumping to your defense, it's like, wow, I felt so alone. And I wish I didn't have that feeling, you know? It puts you in a very defensive frame of mind, and sometimes I do worry that I'm cheating myself out of life because I'm, you know, so fearful and resentful. And I mean, I'll see things out of the corner of my eye and go, there's two big guys staring at me and laughing, and I'll look up and it's like, you know, two young Chinese girls like on their iPhones. To me, it was an evolutionary process. I thought I was a transvestite for a long time because my sisters dressed me up. I might have only been once, but I was about 5 or 6. Kind of like a light bulb went off in your head, but it immediately became closeted. Because see, I was so paranoid about it where I came from. You know, a small town of 19,000, and I would go to the regional library and steal books on the subject, like sex and gender, and like stick them down the trousers, and like, you know, like I was ashamed to even check them out, you know. And I noticed little things, like I noticed like I didn't like being called sir, and so it kind of went beyond just mere transvesticism. And the more I brought it out, the less it became about the clothing, and the more it became about kind of how I preferred to be accepted, or, you know, in the world. But I want to start off with 2 different anecdotes about some of the abuse I get being an out transgender in the year 2015. So on one end of the spectrum, you get this kind of out and out abuse. And then the other end of the spectrum, you have people who like to confess things to you because they think you're into everything because you dress like this. So I usually get old women at bus stops will come up to me and say,
"Did you know I had a lesbian lover one time? We took a holiday to Tenerife, and This was in the 70s when lesbianism was quite new.
My dad, you know, he's very hyper-masculine, and because I was the only boy, I think he wanted me to, he always wanted me to work in the garage and fix the cars, and I had no interest in that stuff. So, you know, there's part of me that always felt like a disappointment in that regard. And I think my earliest shows were just, you know, doing impersonations of my dad for my sisters and mom, and them all laughing. And when I learned how to make fun of that, it gave me power over it. Well, I was in a relationship for about 2 years out here, and I was going out as Sarah maybe like 2 or 3 times a month. I'd kind of just made a decision, like, I need to get out of this situation and move out. I mean, I was living with the person, so I just took all of my women's things, and as soon as I got this room in Bethnal Green, I just laid them all out and started making friends as Sarah. And you know, when I had a promoter ask me for high-res photos of Sarah, it never even occurred to me what a marketing nightmare it could be as well. There's part of me that's a little bit nervous that people are going to expect, you know, me to just be a trans performer with trans material. And you know, what I've been doing lately is just been doing my regular type of material. I just happen to be Sarah. One night there was a Poppy War veteran, and he comes up to the bus stop, and we're waiting at the bus stop. He goes,
Do you mind, I ask you, are you a transsexual?
and I said, yeah. And he said,
So how should I refer to you as she or her, or?
I said, yeah, that'd be great. She or her would be great. And he told me a story about how his daughter came out of the closet as a lesbian, and how
I always stood by her, always.
I went home crying that night. It was just so touching. And it made me feel like I was completely right with my world, because you know, there have been many times I've been dressed as Will that I wanted to be dressed as Sarah, but I don't remember a time where I've been dressed as Sarah that I wished I was dressed as Will.
Well, anyway, that's enough of the comedy for tonight. And now for the reality.
And there have been times, I must admit, where I've looked in the mirror with the dodgy wig that I've had, or this hair, and just gone, do you know what, I'm just not going to bother going out. So it's quite critical, really.
It's very important to have the right wig. If you don't feel confident with the way you look, it can spoil the whole evening or wherever you are. Confidence levels drop.
Initially, I had 1 or 2 trans girls come to my shop, and then I realised that there was a lack of places for girls to go where they could comfortably try on wigs, where they're not judged, and that's what's made me popular within the trans community.
Looks beautiful, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that could really be you. Julie will advise us on which suits us the best.
Just imagine like a little fringe put in there.
Yes, that looked really nice.
Yeah.
I think. She's a really good friend. We get advice, confidence boosting, makeup tips, all sorts of other things.
When I walked into Julie's, I was at a time in my life where I was just about coming out to the world, so I was a little bit nervous. I'd always been blonde, and they quite bluntly said, "You're not a blonde," and they went through a procession of wigs until we found the right one.
Keep trying until you find the look you like, the one that you feel comfortable with.
Get the right wig and you'll feel good about yourself.
Thank you. I was wondering if you personally had ever thought about the possibilities of having a sex change.
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm quite happy as I am. But thank you very much, Sir Bernard.
No, I don't mean you. I mean, generally speaking. Have you ever known of a case of a man turning into a woman?
No, but I've heard of one who turned into a one-way street.
Well, if you think about it, I came out as transgender 34 years ago.
No!
And I've also got boy mode and girl mode, and I do dramatic films in boy mode, and then I'm touring in girl mode and doing stand-up, and I campaign for politics in girl mode.
No!
But I've always felt, since I was 4 or 5, I wanted to express this side of myself, and it's built in. I think it's genetic.
And now we come to the moment that you have all undoubtedly been waiting for.
In January 2013, Suzanne Moore fired a column off to the left-wing New Statesman magazine about the power of female anger. The column addressed many of the injustices against women that Moore could see, from the patronising of female members of Parliament to attitudes towards abortion and her claim that 65% of cutbacks in the public sector affected women. Unfortunately for Moore, amid this blizzard of points, she included the claim about women themselves that we are angry with ourselves for not being happier, not being loved properly, and not having the ideal body shape, that of a Brazilian transsexual. If an article could have a puff of smoke over it, then Moore's was it. In the real world, and the virtual one, it was clear that Moore had made a serious error. Among the more printable accusations against her was that she was a transphobe. Moore did not help matters by responding that, among other things, she did not care for the word. People who were used to beating women down with the accusation were even more furious that their weapon had not worked. Nevertheless, so vociferous and furious was the backlash that within hours Moore was having to clarify her views and assure readers that she was not the hate-filled figure she was now being called. A day earlier, she had been a progressive left-wing feminist. Now, she was a reactionary, hate-filled right-wing bigot. After being hounded by trans people and others accusing her of the most base bigotry, Moore announced that to avoid the bullies and trolls, she was leaving social media. One of the people who took all this least well was Julie Burchill. The enfant terrible of 1980s journalism, Burchill had developed her reputation not just as a literary stylist, but as a literary pugilist. In her own description, the sight of her friend Suzanne Moore being bullied, at risk of losing her job and livelihood for one passing trans reference, was too much for her. In Burchill's reckoning, Moore was not just a friend, but one of the very few other women like her from a working-class background who had made it in journalism. Burchill was not going to allow her homie to go down without someone fighting more nastily for her at her side. And so, in that Sunday's Observer, Burchill decided to hide Moore's puff of smoke by producing a mushroom cloud. Among much else, Burchill attacked Moore's critics for attacking a woman. As Burchill put it, women like her and Moore had had to go through their whole lives as women. They had suffered through period pains, batting off sexual advances from male strangers, gone through childbirth, had stared the menopause in the face, and now had the delights of hormone replacement therapy. Women like Moore and her were damned if they were now going to be lectured at or called names by dicks in chicks' clothing and a bunch of bedwetters in bad wigs. The response was instantaneous.
Judy Burchill, hear us say, we won't go away! Judy Burchill, hear us say, we won't go away!
The British Home Office Minister in charge of equalities, Lynn Featherstone, immediately declared that Burchill's rant against the transgender community was not merely disgusting and a bigoted vomit, but something for which the Observer should sack her. The minister also called for the editor of the paper to lose his job. Duly cowed, the Observer issued an apology for the column and swiftly unpublished it from its website. In the apology issued by the paper's editor explaining why the paper had chosen to withdraw the piece from publication, John Mulholland wrote, "We got it wrong, and in light of the hurt and offence caused, I apologise and have made the decision to withdraw the piece." Something which is very nearly unheard of in British journalism. 5 years later, Burchill herself blamed this episode as one of the reasons why her own career in journalism had ended up, as she put it, up the creek. Meanwhile, though the woman who had called for her sacking, Lynn Featherstone, soon lost her seat in Parliament, she was immediately given a lifetime sinecure in the House of Lords.
And on that bombshell, it's time for me to say...
Ooh.
And apparently people have decided that because I don't think that post-operative transgender men, i.e. M2F, transgender people are women, I'm not to be allowed to talk.
What do you have, Kelly J.K. Minshall, against trans women?
I don't. I just don't think they're women. The point of this campaign was simply to highlight the absurdity that in 2018, saying woman equals adult human female is an offensive thing to say. And
Mr. Harrop is saying that this was part of a long-running campaign by you and your organisation, and as such, it was offensive.
How is the definition of woman offensive?
Adrian Harrop.
What a ludicrous thing to say.
I spent 50 years of my life trapped in the wrong body.
No, 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 no!
I am the transgender person here. I'm in here as a woman, okay?
I agree with that.
Not
and
a
I
he,
respect that.
a she,
Nobody's
a woman,
questioning
okay?
that.
I'm a real woman, Amanda. I want you to know that.
Yes,
a
darling.
real woman, okay? I'm
Yes.
glad that's sinking in. I'm going to say it one more time so it really penetrates.
Yes.
I am a real woman, okay?
No, 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 no! No!
What?
Do you have any sympathy that you're looking at a woman who was trapped in a man's body?
No, unfortunately, I really don't think you can change sex in any meaningful way. Every cell in the human body has got the DNA code of what sex you are. So India obviously looks like a woman.
No, 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 no!
Do you see yourself as, I mean, are you proud to be transphobic?
I don't know what transphobia means unless
Well,
it
you
means
don't
that I
stand
don't.
for her and what she is.
You paid
don't
for a
tolerate.
poster to put on
To
a
talk
wall.
about women, adult human females, and the fact that it's deemed transphobic, it absolutely highlights the absurdity of what's going on.
Do you find that it is more difficult as transgender women, and I know that even the term itself is something that you want to answer, do you find it more difficult?
I find men my own age are quite frightened of a trans woman. You know, when I go out with them, I make a point of just telling them I'm trans right from the start.
Yeah.
I think there's no point.
See, that's interesting. I'm not brave enough to take that tactic.
Yeah.
Well, it's such a difficult subject to broach, and because of the stigma that surrounds trans, which shouldn't exist, really.
There was one that I was sort of talking to quite a while. He was quite keen. And I actually forgot to tell him I was a trans woman because we got on so well in conversation. Because I'm sort of unique. I can talk a little bit about sport, which men find quite interesting.
Yeah. You're a catch.
So it's quite interesting. And we got talking, and I said, I've got to tell you, I actually carry quite a bit of baggage. And he sort of said, oh, I'm very open-minded. We all carry baggage. I've been divorced and I've been... And I went, yeah, I said, I've done all that. I said, but I've got a bit more baggage. And he texted me and he said, will you phone me? So I thought, oh, do you know what? Yeah. And I got brave and I phoned him, so we were talking. And he said, I'd like to meet for a coffee. And I went, OK. I said, but I must tell you about the baggage I carry. And he went, no, don't worry about it. I went, no, I said, I think it's best I tell you. I said, have you heard of of Kelly Maloney? And he went, that effing boxing promoter that cut off his effing. And I went, no. Yeah, I said, that boxing promoter that baggage I carry happens to be Kelly Maloney. He went, how can I ever go out with you? What would people think? And the phone just went dead.
Oh.
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Yeah, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political discussion.
No, I know. Well, but wait. To be fair, but to be fair, you're actually being kind of rude. And that's not fair.
I'm sorry, it's not rude to say that someone who is biologically a male is a male.
You just
someone
called
who
me
is
sir.
biologically male is a male.